All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Monday night. We have here tonight Trent from the Ethereum Foundation, who is kindly sharing his time to join us and share about the EIP 1559 experience. This is the August community meetup of Ethereum Malaysia. Our sponsor is Etherscan, and we'll be moving on to the monthly roundup. So Aswa, do you want to take us away?
Yep. So hi everyone, I'm Asfa. So just a quick roundup about what's happened in the space this past month. So a very big and controversial infrastructure bill was passed in the US Senate. So it has some very controversial crypto clause. So if you pay attention, around last week, Twitter was very active, and a lot of crypto lobbying was happening. So now it's past the Senate. So I believe it will go to the House. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. Yep, next. And yep, so Polygon just merged with Hermes, a ZK rollup in a $250 million deal. So now it is known as Polygon Hermes. And I believe David was one of our guests, right, Harif, last time? Was it David?
Jordi.
Jordi.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, so this is a very cool development in the space. Yep, next. And if you're a football fan or soccer, so Messi just signed for PSG, which is pretty big. And apparently a part of his salary will be paid in PSG fan token. And actually their price rallied once this is announced. So yeah, could this be the start of players being paid by this? All right, next. So yeah, some local news. So I believe everyone knows this now. So Binance has removed some product offerings after a notice by SC. I believe you can still use it. It has been taken down at the App Store and the Play Store. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Harif, but I think you can still use it, but they have removed some of the features such as M1 trading pairs and P2P merchants. Next. Yep, and Pentas.io, a local company that's doing NFT marketplace. So it's actually the Independence Month of Malaysia. This month, August, it's our 64th Independence Day. So they are doing a visual art competition. So if you're an artist and you want to explore NFTs, this will be a great place. They are also well connected with the NFT artists in Malaysia, and I think it'd be a very cool thing to be part of. So yeah, I'm not a designer, but if you are, yeah, why not? Yep. Next. And Huobi invested in a Malaysian crypto platform, Torum. With this investment, they'll be looking to expand the Huobi ecosystem. And last but not least, Harif actually requested this specifically. There's a lot of buzz on Twitter about Paji Penguin, and today, if I'm not mistaken, there's a ad or Paji Penguin at lot 10. So yep. So I don't know who did this. If you are here, maybe you can say hi. All right, that's all. Thanks, Harif.
Thanks, Aswa. I know the advertisers are here. If they'd like to share, please let me know. Or they want to keep private, we can.
I think I can share a bit. I think we are just like having fun. Like all this NFT is so cute, and then we want to raise awareness. And right now it's under COVID and lockdown, right? So actually advertising is super cheap. So we are making use of it, and especially in Malaysia, it's quite cheap. So we're making use of it as a advertisement effort. So we are advertising under our Huga Ventures. So it's one of the ventures that we actually like to buy all those NFT. So we really like NFT. Somehow it's a bit like DAO. So it's like a DAO, and then we share information, and we really like penguins. That's why we end up. Actually, it was being challenged by Tom. Tom also posted a tweet saying that nobody gonna put a penguin on Billboard. So I guess challenge accepted, and this is what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as I understand, Huga does a couple stuff, including X scholarships, right?
Yes, under Huga umbrella, we also have Huga Gaming. We're also running XC scholarships. Yeah, I think this is just a few like initiatives that we are doing because we really like NFT.
All right. Thanks, Johnson. So if anyone wants to talk more about that kind of stuff, feel free to stay back afterwards, and we'll try and get on a gather town to like people can have different conversations. And then whether you have an XC you want to like give out, or you want to like become a scholar, we can talk more. And let's see. Oops, my screen might be stuck. Oh, I think this is the last page already. There is an announcement page. Yeah, I'll just do this very quickly. In the spirit of supporting local projects, so for those who don't know, CoinGecko is a Malaysian team, and they just announced having their first Gecko Con. So if you want to get tickets now. I think there is a deadline before the prices go up. So yeah, get your tickets while the prices are low. And Gecko also did this interesting post on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. It went quite viral, talking about making salaries transparent. And just as a reminder for those of you who may not be aware, there are Gecko, Etherscan, Luno, a bunch of crypto projects who are looking to hire. And to my understanding, please don't quote me on this, the pay is extremely competitive for the equivalent experience in Malaysia. So, yeah, so if you're interested, you can talk to the reps from the various teams afterwards as well. So that's the roundup. And next we'll get Caleb to share on changes on Etherscan for EIP 1559.
This will just be a short one of some of the things which we have done over the past few weeks. Let's see. Right. So is my screen showing well?
Yes.
Right. So EIP 1559. Essentially, what we have done some UI changes. We have done some minor API changes. There will be more changes to come. Hopefully, most of the core stuff we have already gotten done. Basically, what you'll be seeing, more fields, more tooltips, more information to educate users of our site on how it's supposed to be used. Essentially, EIP 1559 should not change your user experience that much at all. If it's changing your user experience extensively, I think there's something not very right with it, with how it's presented. But essentially, it should very much work the same way. There are a few nuances which you need to keep track of. So, for example, on Etherscan, we have some highlights for EIP 1559 transactions. You'll see some tooltips. You see one of those green little balloons by the side of TXT. You would also see things like some of the returns from JSON RPC responses, base fee, max priority fee per guest, things like this. These are natively relevant to EIP 1559. As for legacy transactions, we are talking about transactions transaction 0 and transaction 1. We still show the base fee in the transactions themselves, so it makes it easier to refer to. There's also a new concept called guest target. We will also show that as well. Essentially, what you just roughly need to know is that the higher the guest target is, you could expect a higher increase of base fee during the next block. We also show things like burn fees under the blocks page itself. I tried to explore a bit. You would see some of the small changes we have done. There is also a dashboard which Harif have put together for us. You will be able to see some of the stats, the network stats on the total of how much ETH had been burnt over time, how many transactions are EIP 1559 or not, stuff like that. One of the major changes I'm involved in is also the guest tracker. What we basically are aiming for is a better breakdown between the base fee as well as the priority fees, just to give users a better intuition on how to set their fee range to be like. I understand that wallets are still trying to figure out what's the best experience for users at the moment. What we are doing right now is we are showing the max fee, which is basically a sum of the base fee and priority fee for the moment. We are not trying to make very heavy assumptions on what the users should put or should not put, but this is what we see under the ideal network conditions. Guest tracker changes, some of the API on the backend, most of the changes are on the backend. The way how we calculate the weightage and the ratios which we should be presenting to the users, especially on the dev side, how they should be setting up their gas fees for their wallets and stuff like that. The API is not exactly ready yet. I'm trying to get it merged soon. It's just a PR away. However, for EIP 1559, it does make it easier for you to evaluate and sort of like guesstimate how your gas price should be like during the next block, essentially because the base fee would be able to give you an idea of how busy the network is. In most cases, if you like add 2-3 GUI to whatever the base fee is, you should be able to get your transactions through in less than a minute or two. Otherwise, if not, then the network is pretty congested. Those you would definitely need to start tipping more. Yeah, so basically that's pretty much it. On the Etherscan side, we are still rolling out more changes. We are working on more charts. We are working on more UI tweaks. We are trying to make the experience intuitive, but at the same time, we are trying to roll out more features as well. So if you have any ideas on what you would like to see, just let us know, ping us up. We are over at the FKL group as well, or you can ping Harif directly. Is there any questions? Or should we just jump straight to Trent, then we can leave the questions to that?
I think there's a couple of questions in the chat. Johnson asked, what happens to legacy transactions?
You still can send legacy transactions. We'll show the base fee. We'll show the amount which is burnt. You still can send it. In fact, I think the majority of transactions right now are still legacy anyway. So it's just some of the wallets, they are not, I mean, because MetaMask, they do phase rollouts, so you don't really get EIP 1559 rolled out to all wallets. So you get a lot of that as well. I'm not even sure if Web3.js is already 1559 compatible. I know Ethereum is. So you get bits and parts where you see a mixture of transactions here and there. But yeah, still definitely possible to send.
Okay, thanks, Caleb. And I think it would be interesting to share also, this is my opinion, I don't want to speak for anyone else. It does feel like there's two different types of users, the ones who want to get their transactions immediately and the ones who don't mind paying like 1 GUI priority fee and wait for like a few minutes. And it feels like the UI UX for both wallets and like sites like Etherscan need to somehow be able to take that into account and show different things based on the user persona. But yeah, it's something to explore.
Yep, Trent put something in the chat so we can see how the libraries are prepared.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, all the libraries have implemented support. And then I know Web3.js also released something just yesterday with further tweaks and more updates. And there will probably be future releases as people realize what they missed or how to improve their library.
Yep, awesome. So we have to start updating our libraries as well. We're using quite an old one over at the right contract page.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I think that should be it for Caleb. And like he said, if you have more questions, can ask afterwards. So, yeah, Trent, can you try and share your screen?
How's that?
Yep, looks good. I think you can take it away.
Great. First, thanks, Harith, for inviting me. I actually don't know if I've ever presented to any meetup groups in person or online. So this is, I'm very happy to be sharing my first experience with all of you guys. This is going to be fun. And just for you guys being part of the community, it's really great to share things like 1559 and London Upgrade with people who are interested in this weird part of the internet that we are all part of. So thank you for being part of that. And I'll just jump right into it. So when Harith had originally approached me, I think about a month or so ago, he asked if I could present 1559 from the community perspective, given that's what I work on. And I was more than happy to. So the title of this talk is EIP 1559, Community-Driven Protocol Development. As mentioned, my name is Trent Van Apps. I work for the Ethereum Foundation, even though I just only recently started there in, I think, March. So it's only been a few months, but I do ecosystem initiatives there, like getting people ready for upgrades like 1559, making sure stakeholders are talking to each other, making sure people are ready for whatever changes are coming to the protocol and tooling surrounding it. So today I'm going to be presenting on 1559 and how it's impacted the ecosystem and the path it's taken. So there are two really big points that I want to make, which you are probably already aware of, but it's worth mentioning. London, the network upgrade we just had on August 5th, and 1559 are really the most significant upgrades for the execution layer since Genesis. Genesis being the start of the chain, when the floodgates were open and people could start developing on Ethereum. 1559 itself has been in development for over 2 years, and it's seen a bunch of different iterations, and it's really significant because it touches every layer of the user stack. It changes the EVM, it changes the tooling that interacts with the EVM, that talks between the EVM and applications. It changes user interfaces. It changes how users interact with the chain. Literally every single part of what Ethereum is, 1559 touches some part of it. So it was a very, very big change. And now that we're on the other side of it, we can start to see the effects and what we can do better for next time. And the other main point is that this has really been a bottom-up grassroots process. And this is what I'm going to go through in this presentation, is picking out the people and the groups that really made this possible. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is that I use we throughout the presentation, but this isn't, a lot of this work was done before me. I wasn't working on this directly for the past 2 years, but there have been many people, including people at the EF, peripheral groups like the Ethereum cat herders, various development organizations like Vulcanize, and then the entire community was really involved in this. It's not any one group that just pushed this through and made it possible. This has been literally the entire ecosystem had to work on this project to make it possible, including tooling like Etherscan. It wouldn't have come to mainnet if it weren't for the entire community being involved. So really quick, I'll give an overview of 1559. Just if people have more questions, we can go over this afterwards, but I'm going to focus mostly on the path towards mainnet from a community perspective. So previously on Ethereum, we had first price auctions, which is basically people submit their gas price, and whoever is the highest, in theory, is included in a block. For various reasons, this isn't always the case, but generally this is how the gas fee market worked, that the highest price worked. And these are economically efficient because people tend to bid each other up. And then there's the additional issue of how Ethereum APIs work. Sometimes they're a bit laggy, and you can have, once people send these high price gas transactions, they can clog up Ethereum for hours, or they'll sit in the mempool for quite a long time without being cleared out because people were trying to get into, the next ICO or the next NFT drop, and they just wanted to participate in that project. But once it's sold out, their transaction linger, and it's quite inefficient. So the way that 1559 works is that it adds a base fee to blocks, and this is just a protocol specified minimum amount that each transaction has to pay for inclusion. The base fee increases and decreases based on demand for block space, and the base fee is burnt to prevent miners from manipulating it. Now, these are kind of the very basic components. There's a couple other ones or assumptions that we can get into maybe in Q&A, and I'll try to answer them. But these are the basic components. And then the last one is elastic block sizes. So whenever the base fee whenever there is slightly more demand, the base fee increases by 12.5%. And whenever it is less demand, it decreases. And it's always targeting 50% full, which is 15 million gas. The gas cap is 30 million. It was increased, but we're still targeting relatively the same amount of gas. So the throughput hasn't really changed. Actually, Vitalik has a post which came out the other day, which I should link, which actually the gas limit has increased by about 9%. But roughly, I mean, that's a very small change. So all of these things together allow users to have a much more straightforward way to gauge demand and have better inclusion guarantees. And this is where the better UX comes from. You know, previously you had you could have times where the gas would spike up to, you know, 10 times in a few blocks, and you have no idea what's going on because it's in, like I said, an NFT drop or an ICO, and then your transaction is very underpriced for the market. With 5059, you can send a transaction that's, you know, 2 times as high as the current base fee and have a really, really high confidence that it'll be included in the next few blocks. And if you're using a type 2 transaction, you'll be refunded that extra amount, which is really nice for the user experience. And there's also a really nice feedback loop between network usage and network supply with the burn, which is if there's, you know, higher base fee or the cumulative base fee that's burnt leads to more ETH burnt per transaction, which is a nice feature for some people who are really into that. So I summarized a really big change to the protocol in one slide, and we can get deeper into that in questions if people would like, but on to the next. So many people may not be aware of this, but 1559 has been around for quite a while. In 2016, Vitalik first wrote about it in a blog post, and it was just a general idea at the time, and you can read that quote there. But you can see he was already thinking about it way back around the time of when Ethereum first launched. The next time it came up was in 2018. He had an ETH research post about first and second price auctions, and then, you know, digging into what the 1559 mechanism actually is. So yeah, some people think it started, I mean, if you're in Ethereum, you've probably been aware of it from at least 2019, and, you know, people outside of Ethereum probably heard about it in the last month, or they heard about burning, what's burning, but really this has been around for 6 years now. So when it really started getting more real, Vitalik proposed this is another bit of esoterica, I guess. In August 2018, he opened an issue for Zcash, interestingly enough, and he proposed what is essentially 1559. But on Ethereum, in 2018, November, the first PR was opened on the EIP repo. And this represented the sort of kickstarting of development, and it sat for a few months, I believe. And then in March 2019, Eric Connor was, maybe people are aware of it at the time. I think his handle is Eco Noir, but he was a really big driver at the time. He wrote this big blog post that laid out why he thought this was a really good change and why he thought it was important that Ethereum implement this. And that really, even though, you know, some research by Vitalik had been done and some people had talked about it as an idea, this was really the kickstarting of the process to mainnet, which is, you know, like the 2-year process that we typically refer to as this discussion, and then the blog post that Eric had released. And so shortly after that, in May, Vulcanize, which is a development organization, was hired to begin work on 1559. And I think this was funded by the EF initially, but it was just a very small amount, not you know, a multi-year project runway. And then, you know, Geth started getting more involved, and it was funny. I got this screenshot from Tim, or I got some of these slide components from Tim, and I was looking at it, and if you could see in the right screenshot, my name is there, but I was not aware that I was gonna be included. It's just funny going back and seeing, like, wow, this has really been around this long. So continuing, and then again, another thing which came up at the time, this was in, sorry, it was supposed to be October 2019. So, you know, the implementations are continuing, and behind the scenes, people were starting to organize, you know, community enthusiasm is increasing, And what Kane Warwick wrote up, he's from Synthetics. He wrote this blog post called EIP 1559 is not inevitable, which at the time it was, the community is enthusiastic. They are interested in seeing this on mainnet, but it wasn't really clear how we get from here to here. So he wrote this post, and I helped along with Eric and James Hancock. And the funny thing is, we actually never released this blog post, ironically enough. And we were talking that we should go back through it or release the entire post and just see what was right, or what we got right and what we got wrong about, the path to mainnet. It would be really interesting. I think at the time, Kane and the other people involved, we believed that the biggest impediment was going to be funding. But in reality, I think looking back, this was only one part of the puzzle. The other really big part was convincing people that, these mechanisms were actually going to work. And it wasn't going to, break the network or something. And that was October 2019. And then Tim was part of putting together the fee market working group at ECC 2020. There were conversations at the ETH1X workshop. The idea was to get it live before stateless Ethereum, which is going to happen, but stateless is a little further out, so we're not quite worried about that. Those colliding with each other. Vulcanize's work continued into February 2020 with the initial PR, a proof of concept, and Tim also started running a dedicated contributor call with the goal of getting it on mainnet by end of year 2020, which we can see in retrospect that didn't happen. But it's good to have optimistic targets to push people. And in retrospect, what we were really bottlenecked by was getting Berlin out. Berlin had some prerequisites that we needed to ship before. So Berlin happened earlier this year, and that needed to happen. And then once that was done, we were really able to focus on 1559 and London. In May 2020, there was an alternate proposal called escalator fees, which Dan Finlay of MetaMask had worked on, and these are some of the mock-ups from that time. I think it'll be interesting to see whether some of these concepts or ideas end up getting integrated into the MetaMask UI. I know they're still rolling it out. There were some questions in the chat. If you haven't seen the MetaMask UI yet, don't worry, it'll probably be it should be on all mobile interfaces now, but it may be a few more days until it's rolled out on the web extension. So give it a few days, but it'll be interesting. So this was a previous concept about an escalator fees where the protocol would bid up progressively your user submitted transaction. This isn't where the proposal ended up going, but it's a neat little concept that perhaps could be worked into a UI or as part of a future upgrade to 1559. Continuing with the idea of, the community is really pushing this. In June 2020, Tim and the Cat Herder set up a Gitcoin grant to raise funds to pay implementers and researchers. And it actually turned out that we raised the largest amount to date on Gitcoin, which was over 100,000, and the largest number of donors in the round, which really proved to, I think, people who hadn't been paying attention yet, people outside of this core enthusiast group, that, there are people really interested in seeing this live on mainnet and donating money to actually make it happen. Some people are all talk and no show, but this is people really putting money towards something that they thought was important. In August 2020, Tim was working on the core technical issues. He had a mainnet readiness checklist of these big pieces that had to be included into core clients, like managing the transaction pool, dealing with EIP 2718, and how the rollout plan is actually going to work. And then just after that, he started writing the first State of 1559 updates. And these are really great series if you want to learn more about the project and its changes over time. I think they're all on his HackMD if you want to check them out. In October 2020, the implementations are continuing to get more refined. We figured out a way to keep supporting legacy transactions and simplifying the transaction management pool. Figuring out how to support legacy transactions is really, really important. Ideally, when you have a change, everybody switches over at once, but in reality, that's just not the way things work. It's not realistic. And we want to make sure Ethereum is as anti-fragile as possible. So supporting these legacy transactions for, providers or projects that haven't updated was really important for us. And so now, as you've seen, MetaMask doesn't have the UI supported, and a lot of wallets will take a while to update to type 2 transactions. And that's fine. It's okay that it takes a little bit for people to update and get accustomed to the new way of interacting with the fee market. And that's something that was really important. Also in October, the cat herders created a community outreach report. If you don't know, cat herders are a group of community members funded by various organizations, including the EF and Moloch DAO. And they work on just various protocol initiatives, getting people ready for hard forks, things like that. And they reached out to a couple different, or not a couple, it was quite a big effort. They reached out to miners, some infrastructure providers, wallets, just to get initial assessments of 1559. And I think at the time it was pretty split, maybe 50-50. People were either unsure about 1559 or the other side was in favor of it. But it was pretty clear at the time that we needed to do more work to get people accustomed to what these changes are going to be and how it's going to impact them. November 2020, we also launched the 1559 toolbox to get people more accustomed to it. The last note of 2020 was in December, and this was where a researcher named Tim Roughgarden published an economic analysis of 1559. I believe he's an academic at Columbia, but he's a very highly regarded researcher in the game theory field. And this was actually funded by a community member. I don't think they're anonymous, but they basically reached out to him and said, hey, we're really interested in having you fund this report, complete this report, and funded it completely, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. Having somebody completely independent of any of the, official Ethereum orgs pay for an in-depth report like this was really crucial at the time. And it had a really big impact when he released it. It gave a lot of credence to the ideas that had already been published, but some people either didn't understand or hadn't taken the time to dig into. This guy is, like I said, very well regarded. So having this released was a really nice, it was another tool to demonstrate to people that this was going to be a legitimate update and something that's actually going to work. And you can see in this screenshot that Nick Johnson was convinced by it, and he was one of the most vocal skeptics at the time. One thing I forgot to add to the slide was actually that around, I think, mid 2020, this is when Hasu and Giorgio started writing their 1559 series for Deribit and I think later Paradigm. This was, their work was really actually quite important for breaking down the concepts. And I think they did a lot of early work for explaining and engaging with both the people working on 1559 and the people that thought it was, or they didn't understand it. So I'll make sure to, that's my oversight for not including them, but they did quite a bit of work writing and doing additional research on 1559 to prove that it's actually going to be a legitimate update. In January 2021 was the last official implementers call that Tim had been running. Quilt, which is a team in Consensus, was also involved in that on working on the transaction pool updates. There was an EIP added for the base fee opcode, which exposes the base fee as a native oracle, which, if you don't know, is really, really useful for things like gas price futures. I think Nethermind is working on a project, or they have something called Euler Network. And any other projects can, like any smart contracts can access this on-chain, for example, to incentivize people to use their protocols outside of high base fees. You can start to smooth out congestion or use specific incentivization mechanisms within the protocol, which wasn't possible before. And that EIP makes it trustless. I think this links to a post that Vitalik had written about DOS risks. Basically, because the base fee, or sorry, the block gas limit is doubled, but it's not consistently doubled. It's should be fine to increase it to 30 million. Additional testing happened throughout February with large state tests and building towards testnet releases and trying to verify that this is nodes and the network can actually handle these changes. So this is a bit outside of the implementation, but I think it's important to touch on because it's part of the community perspective. So early in 2021, I think maybe even at the end of 2020, I'll have to ask him. Tim had an idea to create a commemorative NFT for 1559 contributors. This was aligned with a previous project from Stapleworks, which I'm a member of, and I've worked on the Beacon book. And basically, both of these projects, the inspiration is to give cultural prestige or recognition in addition to money to people who are working on core protocol stuff. And so both the Beacon book and the 1559 NFT series were pieces of art or artifacts that people can collect or purchase with ETH, and all of the proceeds go directly to people who worked on these core protocol updates. So it's a really cool concept. And we released the project in July 2020 with art from Kide. I believe he's actually done some NFTs for Etherscan, not for, but of Etherscan, but he's a longtime community member. You can see the art in the screenshot there. It's actually a GIF that rotates. It's pretty cool. So we had no idea how this was going to work and whether it would be successful. And we basically set it up so any proceeds would go to a split contract with contributors. So we didn't have to worry about touching the proceeds, and it's all trustless. And the results were pretty amazing, which kind of speaks to the community's belief in this upgrade, the project, and the protocol changes broadly. It sold out in, that's supposed to be 48 hours. It sold out in less than 48 hours. Total of 32 ETH from the one-of-one patron auction, 243 ETH from the 1559 supporter NFTs, and then 3 ETH donated directly to the split contract. So that's 278 ETH, almost $1 million today, which it really blew our minds that it was completely sold out and that it raised this much ETH. And just after we launched, Vitalik gave a presentation at ETHCC talking about retroactive public goods funding. And this really, it was an interesting coincidence because we were basically validating the concept in real time as he was presenting, which was just a really nice alignment. So hopefully we'll be able to do something like this in the future for something like the merge. Yeah, we're definitely going to. So jumping back into the implementation timeline, I guess we're jumping back a little bit in time. It was 1559 was accepted for inclusion, and this is just the official terminology, which means we're ready to go. It's going to be included in London. From my perspective, this was just before I joined the EF, and I ran another community sentiment gathering, or I performed more sentiment gathering around this time. And there was basically almost unanimous support. I think I surveyed almost 30 projects, reaching out to them, asking what their concerns or questions were with 1559. And it was a significant change from the previous report that the cat hunters had done in October of 2020, which was good to see. People are getting more accustomed to the idea. They have more awareness. The implementations are becoming more real. And also around this time, the cat herders had a mining community call, which this was kind of a contentious thing around the time. that miners were pretty unhappy with 1559 generally, but the reality is, like, yes, they're losing. I don't know if we have any miners on the call. I'm happy to talk to you, but the reality is, like, miners, yes, you're going to lose about 60% of your income. But this is sort of a bigger upgrade to the protocol. We wouldn't make one change to favor just, one subset of Ethereum. We have to consider the entire community, for the next 5, 10, 20, 100 years. And this was an upgrade that was going to be really important over a longer time frame. And especially the other consideration was mining is going away with the merge and proof of stake. So validators are also going to be affected by this. It's not like we were targeting one specific group. So we had this call with cat herders and tried to listen to some concerns. And from this call, I think Micah brought up the idea of MEV to miners. And that's when I think a lot of the smaller mining pools and maybe some of the larger ones really kicked into their MEV extraction projects. So, net, it was probably positive. They're losing income, but they're also getting a better understanding for MEV. Yeah, that was definitely a contentious time. And Tim and I had many discussions in the ETH R&D Discord about how this is going to affect miners, and trying to help people understand that this isn't, it's not a punitive change. We're not trying to punish anybody. This is a greater protocol change that is more important for improving user UX and improving how the chain functions. So April, it's been implemented in all clients and deployed to client integration devnets. There were 2 different devnets. I think one of them was called Calaveras, and this is where we really started testing the capabilities of 1559 and spamming various bits of the network with transactions, and it seemed to work. Another thing I was deeply involved with was throughout May and July, we held 4 community calls, and these were organized with infrastructure teams, wallets, tooling, libraries, to address concerns and help them get ready for 1559. So I think the first one was with wallets or just a general call, but we also had one for gas API providers. And these are really important for me personally, because it helped to get all these disparate parties into the same room together talking. The core dev call has its place. It's more of a higher level forum for discussing EIPs and scheduling hard forks and testnet changes, but there isn't always a place for ecosystem tooling and infrastructure to find a place to talk to each other. So this was really, in retrospect, incredibly important, and we'll probably continue doing this. In fact, we had another one last week analyzing 1559 on mainnet, which was really interesting to see how people are adapting and helping API providers share their algorithm suggestions, for example. And we'll probably, I think we're going to have another one in about a month to continue to assess 1559. It's not like it just goes live and that's it. There's quite a bit that goes into people understanding how to best use this and how to best present it to users. So it's going to be a learning process for everybody. And people have already started to see how the mechanism is actually behaving on mainnet. And the final bit on this slide is just, we had the London testnet announcement in June 2021. This is something that we definitely want to improve for future changes. This is a bit, I think the first testnet hard fork was maybe a few weeks after that. So timelines were tight, but we were a little bit, we were backstopped by the difficulty bomb going off in August. So we really had, we had to get this out. And I think even though the timeline was rushed, not rushed, I won't say that. Let me take a step back. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. Even though the timeline was a little bit compressed, the concern is always security. The Geth team is some of the smartest people I know working on Ethereum. They're the most experienced, and they've deeply involved in implementing this. And if they were concerned about, rolling out things, or from a game theoretic perspective, or whether there was going to be a consensus issue and they had a concern, I think we would have probably delayed into the difficulty bomb, no problem. But they didn't have those concerns, and plus the past 2 years of validation in terms of game theory and the various projects that have gone underway, like the Rough Garden report. I think we were confident enough that this is going to be a success. The final things that we worked on leading into London, and these were spread out over many months. This was actually, the first one was kickstarted by Holger Drews of the Ethereum Foundation. He works on Ethereum JS. And then I took it on. It's London Readiness Ecosystem Tracker, and it's something that we put together, and that's what I linked in the chat, of just, who's going to be impacted by this change, who's going to be impacted by London and 1559 specifically, and how can we track their progress. And to date, I think all of the libraries are updated or have had multiple releases. And then on like the secondary effect is all of the Solidity tooling. I think Brownie had a release last week that I need to update on there. So this is really useful for us from the ecosystem, or for me personally, following who's working on stuff, who's having trouble, who needs more attention. And we'll probably continue to do this. I know they've already released something a little more high level for the merge, but we'll probably do something similar for the merge when proof of work is replaced by proof of stake. Another thing I put together was I put it together with Tim, the implementer's cheat sheet. And this was a document which I think a lot of people found helpful. It's just a list of relevant links and explainers for tooling, infrastructure, various levels of the stack and the ecosystem to understand 1559 and just be better educated about how it's going to impact them. So I would update this consistently with the latest algorithm release or the latest testnet access, things like that. And this is something that we really wanted to make sure was available for people. And then the other thing on this slide is Tim's 1559 resource list, which was incredibly helpful for me. Whenever I had somebody with questions, I would point them directly to this resource list. And I think he's only going to add to it over time as we get more and more validation of the mechanism. So all of that was 2 years compressed into about half an hour, or maybe more than 2 years. 1559 went live with London, which happened on August 5th, block 12,965,000. And yeah, there were a bunch of watch parties. I don't know if anybody caught them. They were pretty fun to, I hope you did. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of Ethereum and hard forks in general, is that you can sit in a room or at least on a Zoom call with a bunch of people who are interested in the same stuff as you, and watch these protocol changes, which you've either worked on or tracked for a long time, come to life. And I was on the ETHStaker call as well as the Bankless call, which was just a lot of fun. As you the countdown up to the fork block, and then you start to watch ETH being burnt and the mechanisms take effect. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it if you haven't done it before. So now that it's live, how do you actually track it? There's a bunch of different places. Watchtheburn.com. There's Etherscan, which is the local explorer built for Aragon. ETHburn.info, which is from David Myhall. He's got a bunch of different sites that will be linked at that URL, like Money Movers, another great site. And then there's my personal favorites are on dune.xyz. I think that's the URL. Somebody double check that. They changed it recently. But if you just search 1559, there's a ton of really great dashboards, and these are all user created, user submitted. So I really recommend you go there and maybe even create your own if there's a metric you aren't aware of. And apologies, my oversight. I meant to include the Etherscan page here, but they have a really great dashboard as well. You should check that out. But yeah, this is the image here is one of my favorites to track over time, which is the adoption or the relative weight of legacy transactions to dynamic transactions, legacy being not 1559 enabled and dynamic being 1559 enabled. And as you can see, it's slowly creeping up over time. It cuts off a few days from the first week of 1559 being live, but it's really encouraging to see this steadily creep up over time. And I think that last, I don't know if it measures a section of the day, but basically that last slice there is just under 50%. So I think within the next few days, we'll probably see blocks with over 50% transactions that are type 2. And this will, again, it's related to wallet providers rolling out support. So you can just, it's really nice to just track this and see progress happening right in front of you. So like I said, that was a lot of years compressed into a few minutes. But what's the future of 1559? So post-launch metrics, like I mentioned, now that it's live, we're starting to collect data about the average gas prices, variance in a block, what users are submitting for tips, the ratios of tips to base fee, and we'll use all this data to inform both users and tooling. You know, tooling has to provide, they typically provide some sort of hard-coded value, and I think the default is 2 GUI now, and maybe it could be 1 GUI for priority fees. We don't know. But over the next month or so, we'll start to have a much better idea of what the best fit suggestions are, and then, you know, how that actually impacts gas interfaces like MetaMask and any other wallet providers. They'll start to adapt over time. One of the people that I forgot to mention in this presentation is Barnaby Monod. He's a really great guy. He works for the EF, and he's done a ton of research with the Robust Incentives Group. Over the past year or so, he's done research and simulations for 1559, and he's going to continue doing that for, now that it's live. He actually presented at this call last week, doing some initial analysis on what he's seeing and where he expects things to go, or recommendations for how things can change. So kudos to Barnaby for being such an amazing contributor. The other things related to the future of 1559 is currently the base fee is symmetric, meaning it goes up 12.5%, and it goes down 12.5%. But in reality, this, I should link a document in the chat when I'm done presenting, but I created a visualization. It actually rises faster than it falls based on how the percentages work. So it might be nice to make that symmetric. And we could also look into making the updates symmetric and smooth. Sorry, I jumbled some of the words together there, but basically there are improvements we can do to make the mechanism actually better. And Vitalik has actually already released a post a few months ago talking about how this could actually operate similar to an AMM, where it's a smooth curve instead of these 12.5% jumps. And there'll be a lot of tuning as we, like I said, as we look into the data, as we dig into it, we'll start to get a better idea of how these things can actually be changed and tweaked a little bit, maybe as an AMM on a smooth curve. A little bit further down the line, the merge, like I mentioned, transaction fees from priority will go to validators rather than miners. That's relatively small change. But a bigger change is that data sharding will use something similar to 1559 to price the cost of storing data. And like I said, this is important for proving the concept, which we can later use. One thing that related to data is actually, there were several versions of 1559 which went live many months ago. Celo, Near, and Filecoin all have their own implementation, which was really encouraging to see people taking this up and implementing it. But unfortunately, we couldn't use it. We couldn't use it as proof of mechanism viability, just because those chains have either they changed the implementation slightly, or they had varying levels of demand that weren't really going to track with Ethereum mainnet. So now that we have live mainnet, even like using Ethereum testnets, it's never going to be, you're never going to be able to approximate mainnet data. So we're really excited. I know myself and Tim and people like Barnaby are already diving into the data, and we're really excited to tune the mechanism for the future, which hopefully will, I know there's a hard fork coming up in Shanghai. That's when the difficulty bomb has been delayed to, but we'll see if we include 1559 updates in that upgrade or a future one. So I want to say that's all I have. Thank you, Harith and Ethereum Malaysia, for inviting me. 1559 has been an incredible experience, and I hope this this presentation demonstrates that it really was a community effort. You know, there have been probably thousands of people involved, from working on the implementation to reviewing or making contributions here and there, writing about it, reading about it, you know, donating to the Gitcoin grant, and even just participating in using it. I think that's all important for validating and proving that the mechanism works. So a huge thank you to everybody, even if you were involved in a small way. This is all super important for making upgrades like this successful, and, you know, making Ethereum generally successful. So a huge thank you. And while we have Etherscan here, shout out to them, because they've done a ton of great work in a short amount of time. Really amazing stuff to get the biggest block explorer ready for 1559. So kudos to them. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions, or we can open it up for a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Trent. There was a lot of information. I think we have some questions. If people ask their questions earlier in the chat and you feel like it hasn't really been answered, please feel free to copy and paste it back in the chat, because there's been a lot of messages, so we might miss them. But instead of doing a Q&A with you, Trent, I think we'll just jump into the fireside chat, because we do have like only 30 minutes left. And at least myself, I have a lot of questions.
Of course.
Okay, so to start off, usually I like to start this off with just for us to get to know you a bit more, like your history, your background into coming into Ethereum. So so the first question would be like, what was your story? Like, how did Trent get into Ethereum like all those years ago, and like how do you end up in the EF now?
Yeah, so my background is not as a developer, or I like to tell people that pretty much everybody comes from outside crypto, unless you're very young and you're lucky enough to find crypto early. But my background is actually in architecture and design. So I went to school for that, and I worked professionally as an architect for a few years before quitting in 2018. And I decided to do crypto full time. I had discovered Ethereum in, I think, 2015, and then really got involved in the community in early 2016. So it was a bit of a progressive process. And I basically have just, the obsession has only deepened over time. So it started off just, you know, reading things on Reddit here and there, and eventually got more and more involved. I think I participated in the DAO and wasn't really sure what was happening, but, you know, I was excited to be along for the ride and participating. And then just over time got more and more involved. I helped to run a conference in called Run EVM back in the day. I think that was 2019. I've volunteered at a bunch of hackathons, ETH Berlin, ETH New York. And these were really important for me to just get exposure to the community, because, you know, when you start off as just a random community member, it's hard to know even who to talk to or where to go to engage with people. Or if, like, from me personally, my goal eventually was to work full time. So it was a long path. So I started off as a community member. I volunteered wherever I could. And then I just started contributing. I wrote a lot. I tried to be vocal about things that I saw happening. And then I just got involved. My first job was like random. I think I did some like t-shirt design for Status. I should find maybe somebody has those still, but yeah, they shared those at like, I think one of the ETH Berlins. It was like a lizard or something. but yeah, so I did like a bunch of random work. And then I worked for an IPFS company in 2019, and then started my first full-time job with Whiteblock in 2019 as well, worked for them for a bit. And then after that, worked for ETH Global, which was an amazing experience. I'm sure all of you are aware of the work that ETH Global does, running hackathons, previously in person, now online, but it's a really great onboarding ramp for new and existing devs or people who are on the periphery. So I did that for about a year, helping them run these online hackathons. And that was until February of this year. And then I did a little bit of work actually with 1559. I did some of the sentiment gathering and then started working full time in March of this year for the EF. And at the EF, I do, like I mentioned, ecosystem work, trying to make sure stakeholders are aware of changes and are aligned, kind of just running around, a lot of DMing, making sure people are on the same page and that, you know, things are going to happen as smoothly as we can make them happen. Hopefully I didn't miss anything there.
So I guess a related question would be like, so your role is ecosystem initiatives. Is that like a newly made up role? And like what exactly does is a job description other than, you know, like chasing people around?
Yeah, so I think in my Twitter bio I have Ethereum guy or Ethereum it's ecosystem person. So yeah, it's not like a super official term, and there have been many people already doing this sort of work before me without an official position. This is just I'm another person who is able to help in various ways, like similar to what the cat herders are already doing. I'm just adding to the work that they have been doing for the past few years. I don't know if there's an official description, but I work closely with Tim and Danny. Danny Ryan is the ETH2 kind of coordinator. And Tim, you're probably well aware of Tim Byko. He's the ETH1 coordinator, and eventually they'll merge into one human probably. But yeah, so I work very closely with them, trying to figure out, you know, where are we now and where do we want to be in 3 months? Where do we want to be in 6 months, 1 year? And then we work backwards from there to see what changes need to happen. And that's kind of what I hope I laid out in the presentation of seeing what things need to change for an upgrade. So 1559, there was, like I said, it touched basically every level of the stack, and we had a relatively short amount of time to try and get people on board with this concept of understanding this mechanism. And so we wanted to do as much as we could leading up to the fork as well as after to get people ready for the changes, and, you know, taking suggestions and understanding what the pain points are along the way. Yeah, so that's specifically 1559, but broadly, it's like I mentioned, making sure stakeholders understand changes. So this is developer tooling, users, even investors, infrastructure providers, the entire ecosystem. We want to make sure that we're aware of what the needs are and possible issues we want to avoid.
I think I'll ask one more question before we jump to the 155 and stuff. So we've had like a couple of people who've either worked for EF or had some sort of role there. We had like Wei Jie and Ying Tong to like share stuff at ETHKL before. So is there like a simple short way to describe how the EF is structured, like different, like the hierarchy or the different sort of teams within it?
Yeah, this is my eternal question because it's a very loose organization. If people aren't familiar, the EF is structured as sort of a community of communities. There are several, or basically all the teams are independent. You have the core team, which handles, you know, finance and legal and some like higher level stuff. But really, everybody is free to set their own budgets and make their own hiring decisions, and they operate as independent orgs, and they just receive, you know, you can think of it as like a hub and spoke, but it's very loose relationship, and that these teams, these development teams, have a lot of freedom in what they pursue and how they pursue it, and how they structure themselves. So it's not a top-down thing where you have, I report to Tim, Tim reports to Danny, Danny reports to Aya. It's not like that at all. It's I have tons of flexibility to pursue the things that I think that are most important for the ecosystem and Ethereum broadly. But yeah, it's people have a lot of independence, and the teams pursue what they think is important over time.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I should touch on 1559, and we don't have that much time. So I think to start off with like something you mentioned earlier and not too like serious. You mentioned the Stateful Works NFT. What was the story behind that? Like you mentioned a little bit more just now, but like who came up with the idea, and like how did you guys talk to each other and reach out to Kite to the design, or like how did you structure it? Like, yeah, what was the story behind that?
Yeah, I think Tim had initially had the idea in the back of his head for a few months, maybe even going back into the end of 2020. I'll have to ask him what the specific time was, but yeah, he had always thought of this. And basically when I was working on the Beacon book with all the contributors, I think that really may have spurred him to, push on it a little bit more. I encourage everybody to go check out the Beacon book. It's a book containing the perspectives of I think 46 ETH2 contributors. So it's a digital and physical book, and we're basically at the tail end of the project where we sold 100 of the physical books and we're mailing them out now. But it's a really interesting time capsule of the Beacon launch last year. But Tim was the main driver for this. I was happy to help him, do some of the comms and some of the messaging, as well as doing some of the infrastructure, as it was hosted by Stateful Works, the organization. And then Kite did the art, and I noticed during my call that you actually have one of his NFTs in your background, so you're probably already familiar with the artist. Yeah, he's a great guy. So yeah, it was us three working together alongside all of the 1559 contributors. And as I mentioned, all the ETH from that sale goes directly to the people involved, which is really awesome. And we were incredibly happy to see it is so successful.
When you guys did it, I think when you first started, the NFT bubble hadn't really like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can call it a bubble, but it hadn't really like exploded the way it has, right? So like, I guess you didn't really like think that far ahead of like how much money is behind this NFT ecosystem.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, actually, there was a first NFT bubble like in February or March or something. There was the first boom earlier this year, and we were like, oh man, it would have been nice to launch back then. Maybe we can get some more ETH for the 1559 contributors. But like you said, there is still more demand out there, and I think Tim or somebody was joking that maybe we set off the next NFT bubble with the project. I don't think that's true, but
it's always just what you claim.
Yeah, exactly.
So the whole thing kind of also potentially, like you said, like shows a good kind of direction for funding. Like public goods funding has always been this question mark, right? Like how do we do it in a sustainable way and also in a decentralized way? So what's, because you've been with ETH Global, you've been with the EF, like what do you think of the like currently how funding works within Ethereum, and perhaps even like outside of Ethereum, like for blockchains in general? Like how does public good fundings kind of, what do you see of that whole like ecosystem of funding for public goods, and what would you like to kind of see more of, or new experiments being taken to advance this public goods funding?
Yeah, so I think I would defer to people who are involved in evaluating funding things, but I can give my general opinion. I think the more, like you said, the more experiments we have, the better. or the more variety in mechanisms, the better. So currently there is Gitcoin, which is a pretty demonstrably successful quadratic funding experiment for public goods. And it's being refined, through the Gitcoin DAO. If anybody has delegated to me, I'm pretty actively involved on Gitcoin DAO, participating in proposals there and, keeping the ecosystem moving. There's also, the EF runs their own ecosystem support program, which sometimes includes funding. But that's looking at the beginning of the funnel, whereas, so they have to like solicit applications, review the applications, and then disperse funding if the grant is successful. Whereas this thing with NFTs, or generally the idea of retroactive public goods funding, you look at the work that somebody has already completed, and then you reward them after the fact. So I think we're only going to be in a better position if there are more experiments like this. So retroactive public goods funding can come in the form of, I think Gitcoin actually falls under this. A lot of the projects which have bubbled to the top are ones that consistently contribute, or are, the community recognizes them as powerful contributors over time. It's not like I go there with an idea and I say, hey, please fund me for work I haven't done yet. It's, Prism, it's Lighthouse, it's Etherscan, it's all of these projects which are core components of the ecosystem, which have been funded over time. So in addition to retroactive public goods, there's NFTs, as you saw with Kida actually did one of the first ones, as we saw. And then there's the Stateful Works 1559 NFTs, but you can also do something like streaming ETH. So there's a project called, well, this is both retroactive and forward-looking, but there's something called Open Grants. I think it's .io, it might be .com, but I helped with that, and it's just a community member streaming 4,000 ETH to all of the ETH2 contributors over like a few years or something. But so that's like in reward for previous work on ETH2, and also the incentive to continue working on it. So I think the more mechanisms we have, the better. And there are probably interesting ways where we can combine these things to create even more powerful mechanisms. I think one thing we can be better at is actually surfacing, like closing the loop to get people involved in working on public goods, because sometimes it takes quite a bit for them to actually get engaged in the ecosystem and get involved. So the tighter we can make that loop, the better it will be, I think, for the ecosystem and the protocol generally.
Okay, and so it's interesting that we talk about funding, because like one of the ideas for, and I don't know if people realize this, but the base fee for 1559, it's not necessary that it has to be burnt, right? Like based on the research that's done, like potentially it could even be like, let's say, donated to open sourced decentralized way that can fund like developers or just like public goods around Ethereum. So has there been any discussion around like potentially if that could be changed, the base fee, like instead of being burned, it could be somehow figured out that we can do donations in a decentralized way, or we could even like reward to like miners retrospectively? Like, is there any like discussion on potentially how that could be changed?
Yeah, so especially around the time of earlier this year, when the miners were voicing their concerns, and in the Rough Garden report it also came up. But so the first option is like, it could be, the fee could be, instead of burnt, it could be smoothed over X blocks to miners. That's one option. The other option, like you said, was to, instead of burning it, forward it to some sort of governance contract, these are both totally viable options. I just think that whether these will actually be on mainnet remains to be seen. One, because burning ETH is incredibly powerful from a mimetic sense. So it already exists. And my personal evaluation is I don't think that it will be, the burn will be removed, maybe partially, but I think touching the burn at all will probably not happen. Just because it's incredibly powerful from a mimetic perspective. Like people understand, or they think they understand what the effects are. So taking that away would probably not happen in the near term. And then the other question of like whether it can be forwarded to governance. I think you're probably aware, like Ethereum doesn't have on-chain governance. It doesn't have protocol voting. It doesn't have any sort of structure for working through governance or process. And forwarding any of the burnt ETH would require that process to exist, which it doesn't for the general, for the Ethereum ecosystem. It doesn't exist for open source developers like you suggested. And that's really the harder part. Forwarding the burnt ETH is actually pretty simple. It's just changing the implementation. What's that?
What to do with the forwarded money?
Yeah, exactly. Finding out what to do with it and how to disperse it is actually much more difficult. And then from a game theory perspective, if you're forwarding the ETH, basically burning the ETH prevents manipulation of the base fee. If somebody is able to get the base fee in either as a miner getting it directly, or it going to a governance contract is maybe a little bit more roundabout. But basically, if somebody can get a hold of that base fee, then they have incentive to manipulate it and to bump it up because they'll eventually benefit from a higher base fee. The likelihood of this happening might be very low, but in order for the mechanism to be sound, you have to design it for the worst case scenarios. And the worst case scenario is like the governance contract becomes corrupted and, some malicious party gets a hold of it, or eventually over 20 years works their way into this management, and they're corrupt and bribing people, and they'll take high base fees and do a kickback to whoever sent a high base fee. In the worst case, I'm not saying that this would happen, but there's a possibility that it could, and that's something that we want to avoid. Definitely for this first iteration of 1559, there will be changes in the future to how the mechanism works, but I think the discussion is just starting. I know Barnaby has talked a bit about like, hey, it might be interesting if we put some of this ETH towards something else. But my gut right now is that it's probably not something that would be pursued in the near term, especially given like the merges coming up.
Yeah, and I think that ties in nicely to Julie just asked in the chat, reading up on security aspects of 1559. What are other attack vectors that could possibly affect 1559 other than spam?
It's a good question. I like to think that most of the exploits have been covered already. I mean, aside from on testnet, they found a few implementation details that had to be reworked in order to prevent people from triggering a consensus bug, but that's not quite what this person is asking about. I mean, this hasn't changed from pre-1559, but miners they still have control of the gas limit, and they could increase the gas limit to 50 million, 100 million, but that's not really related to 1559. I really don't think. So again, in a world where we're thinking most game theoretically or like the worst malicious intent, miners could form a cartel of 51% and collude to not accept transactions below, they would put a floor on the base fee of 1,000 Gwei or something. Or something lower, possibly. I mean, there's a couple of reasons why this won't happen. And again, this is similar to pre-1559. Miners could have always done this, but why haven't they? I mean, so for one, it's hard to communicate not necessarily hard to communicate, but it's hard to coordinate. Defection is relatively costless because you can scoop up all of the fees below that, and you're the only mining pool doing that. So it's not really likely that that's going to happen, or it would be really hard to maintain that. It would be hard to disincentivize defection because anybody can just mine a block below that floor that people are setting and scoop all those base fees. And then there's the community issue, which I think a lot of people forget about. Ethereum is a community. It's a social layer in addition to a protocol layer. And if miners started either increasing the gas limit to ridiculous amounts or only like trying to set a floor and base fee, that's effectively an attack on the protocol, both from like state growth and affecting the user perspective. And that's actively against the interests of mining pools. I like to think that they are long-term players, and playing a short-term game for short-term profit, I just don't see that happening. So those aren't really like 1559 specific. Maybe I couched or I phrased old attacks in a new way. But yeah, Tim would probably be the best person. Maybe he has some more specifics if you want to reach out to him.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, like also like the two largest mining pools, like Spark Pool and Ethermine, they've like been very like they've kind of staked their entire reputation around Ethereum. So it's unlikely. Yeah,
exactly.
Although you can imagine, like as we get closer to the merge, that some stuff like that might come up. And I personally was, and I don't know if this is the rationale at all, but I think like I thought one of the reasons for doing the 1559 like now before the merge was that if we were to do it together with the merge or after the merge, then it's easier for like mining pools to like do a fork of Ethereum because they don't have to like take out 1559. They can just like do it. Whereas now, if they want to do it and not have 1559 in there, they'd have to like make a change. So it's harder to like make a change.
Yeah, that's the general argument for the difficulty bomb, or one of the arguments. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. But I don't think that was not the primary reason for not the primary rationale for including it now. It was, the merge is a huge change, and 1559 arguably is an equally large change in terms of what levels of the stack it touches. So you would never want to put those on mainnet at the same time. And I think given it's a new mechanism, it's useful to have it live for some time before we do another big change. And in the presentation, the idea was to get it out before stateless Ethereum. And that happened. So that was successful, but we want to make sure that we're not coupling things too tightly together. But the intent was never to make it harder for people to fork or to make it harder for proof of work miners to fork. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could go to Ethereum Classic if they really like to continue mining an EVM chain. Unfortunately, all the miners I've spoken to are not interested in mining Ethereum Classic, but we'll see what happens.
There's been a bunch of 51% stuff, so might affect it. Okay, I do recognize it's like pretty much time already, but if anyone has any questions, like last 1 or 2 questions, feel free to put it in. Otherwise, I do have like 2 more questions. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah, I can stick around for a few more minutes. I'm a little flexible on time, so unless you want to end it directly, that's totally fine.
No, that's fine. I got a couple questions.
Sure.
One is because you mentioned the whole like governance and gas limit. So I don't know if you've heard of this EGL project, Ethereum Gas Eagle or something like that. Where to give context to the audience, like they're suggesting a coin that if you stake Ether in, they'll create like a balancer liquidity pool, and with that EGL token, you can vote on what you think the gas limit should be. So it's a kind of a wider discussion on like how to handle gas limits and whether there should be any kind of coin voting related to it or not. But I don't know if you have like a 2-minute kind of description or thoughts on that.
Sure. Apologies to anybody who has purchased this or is a part of the team, but I think it's a horrible idea, mainly because it doesn't involve any of the people that are core contributors. I know that the ETL team has been working on this for a while, and it's something that they really think is a good idea. But from my perspective, personally, I'm not speaking for the EF or anything. I don't see how using a coin and a speculative asset to vote on the gas limit is a improvement over what the status quo is. Basically, after Berlin, we fixed the latest DOS risk to the chain, and you should go check out some of the blog posts around Berlin. And I think it was an opcode repricing, and that's the only reason that the gas limit was increased. I will say that I think there could be it could be much more defined in terms of how the gas limit is evaluated and how it's raised or lowered. That could definitely be improved. But using a coin when the major parties, like the core devs, for example, I don't consider myself qualified enough to make judgments on what the gas limit should be. And just because I have a coin and I'm voting on something, that doesn't mean I'm qualified. I don't think introducing a coin improves anything in terms of the governance process or making qualified decisions about what safe gas limits are or where it should be. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a wider discussion, like I said. So I think it's as good as we can get in 2 minutes. But I think one counterpoint or just a general point that people make is that after we move to ETH2, it will be even harder to find a consensus, because right now there's only a few mining pools that essentially can talk to each other and coordinate. But when there's thousands of validators, no one will know what the gas limit should be. And yeah, it's still an unresolved question, I think, at least from the wider community's point of view.
Yeah, for ETH2, it's I don't know if it's a different question or what because there's no execution, so there's no real gas limit yet on ETH2. It's just they're just verifying the beacon chain. But I can say with reasonable confidence that any mechanism for setting the gas limit on ETH2 will not include a coin.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So, okay, one last question for me is just again, because you've been with ETH Global and EF, how would you recommend the people here who've maybe not been as involved with Ethereum, or they're in the periphery, whether they're a developer or not, how would you recommend them to take that kind of intimidating step, right, when you're not in there yet? Yeah, how would you recommend them to get in more closely into the ecosystem, whether with EF or with other projects, to start contributing?
I mean, you just said it, start contributing. The easiest way is to find something that you see is missing or something that you think is broken. If you're a developer, start contributing to any of the open source repos, any of the libraries. I know contributing to the clients themselves is pretty intimidating and can take a lot of time to understand. But for that, we're running something called the Core Developer Apprenticeship Program, CDAP, with Piper Merriam, and he's been doing this for a few months, maybe 2 months now. And this is a great way to get exposure to and guided learning to a lot of core development concepts and processes. So I think they're going to be opening up the next cohort soon. So if you're a developer and you're interested in getting deeper in the ecosystem, you should definitely apply to it. And it's funded. So if you're worried about, not being able to work on it because you have to do other work, you can do it part-time, and it's also a funded opportunity. So we will support whoever is willing to put in the time to contribute to the protocol. For me personally, as a non-developer, the one thing I did was just being active. I think it's really easy with Twitter or Reddit to be passive consumer. And the caveat being, like, you don't have to have an opinion on everything, but starting to, if you want to make a name for yourself and be a more prominent community member, you have to start talking about things. So if you have a strong opinion about something, you should tweet about it. You should write a blog post explaining why you think X idea is amazing, or why you think this about Ethereum culture, or why you think this about the direction of the protocol. The only way people are going to start to understand that you're a community member is if you start voicing it, and voicing it through blog posts, or showing up to things like calls like this is a great way to continue doing that and demonstrating that you're interested in the future of the protocol. And that's just like generally being a community member. I recommend everybody just, share what you're thinking, engage, participate beyond like just liking something, or, dig a little deeper. You can also get involved in the Ethereum cat herders. It's a very, very low level way to tap into. They do like note series, but it's very, very close to core development. So if you're not technical, but you want to contribute in some way, they do paid note taking or transcription of core dev calls. And that's like an amazing way to see who is involved, what they're talking about, what the concerns are, where the protocol is going. It might seem like kind of a silly task, taking notes or transcribing, but it's actually incredible. Actually, I did this, now I'm remembering, I did this a few years ago for like one of Vitalik's talks. He had a talk on rollups, and I just transcribed the entire thing. And it was helpful for me to learn about rollups. And I think it has like thousands of claps on Medium, like years later, just because people go back to it as a resource. And it helps other people learn. It's probably out of date at this point, but just do things consistently, show up consistently, and that's a really effective way to make yourself known and contribute to the community. Getting a job is a little more difficult, but once you're known to be contributing consistently, or you have a voice on any of these platforms, and you're known as a contributor, it becomes much more simple to if somebody says, "Oh, I saw that blog post you wrote, awesome, that gives me context for this interview," or you're interested in working on an area that we're hiring for, it becomes that much easier for somebody to or for like a potential employer to pursue you. If you're passive and only looking for, like, this is one way to distinguish yourself from people who are just, not everybody has to be an active community member. It's totally fine to be passive and, just along for this crazy ride, totally fine. But if you're interested in, working full time, which is, taking your Ethereum experience to another level, starting to distinguish yourself from a passive community member is a great way to move forward. So start writing, start communicating, start being vocal about things, start contributing, especially if you're a developer and you have a team that you want to work with or something. Get into their Discord, try to help people understand if it's a DeFi protocol, help them write explainers. And then basically that also generalizes to any other project, not just DeFi projects. Just be helpful where you can. And almost every project I know is remote friendly. So they're more than willing, and there are more jobs than there are developers and just people generally. So you probably have a good shot if you do want to work full-time in the space, or even part-time. I know some people do part-time. Yeah, long-winded response.
Thanks a lot. And one thing for Malaysians, generally, if the project pays in US dollars, it's 4 times what you would get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That's like the dream if you like stay in Malaysia, but you work like getting like US pay. So it's paradise. Yeah, we have a couple people here, I think, who are part of the apprenticeship Discord. And
Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah, and for you guys, if you want to share with the rest later or in Telegram, please feel free. And yeah, I would say also just volunteering. I volunteered at DEF CON, and that helped a lot. And volunteering even with Ethereum Malaysia, just a chill, helps to like get the load of some of our bags and get experience like Trent mentioned. Yeah, so that's we've taken like quite a lot of your time today. So thanks a lot, Trent. And hope you enjoyed meeting the Malaysian community. And if you're ever allowed to travel again or like in this part of the world, please feel free to drop by. We're a really cool place generally for tourists to hang out.
I just got back from a trip, and I think the next trip I'm thinking of will probably be Southeast Asia. So I'll be in your neighborhood.
Nice.
Looking forward to traveling is generally kind of tough, but hopefully sometime soon. I'd love to.
Yeah, and you'll have the whole community to host you, and like if we can have in-person meetups again, we'll definitely do one with you in person, so people can like actually meet you.
Awesome.
All right.
I'd love to. I can join I'm sure there were questions I missed in the chat. So if anybody, I'm happy to join like your Telegram channel or something, and we can follow up there. You can just drop me a link, or if you have a Discord or something, I'd be more than happy to continue answering questions because it looks like there were quite a few.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll get you the Telegram link later because I think we have both Telegram and Discord, but I think the Telegram one's more active.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll share that later. And yeah, so thanks a lot for sharing your time, Trent.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right.